The emergency room nurse told him to stop faking it and sit still as his hands shook uncontrollably against the metal armrest. 58-year-old Robert Chin sat hunched in the crowded waiting area while other patients stared and whispered. Two young medical assistants laughed near the intake desk, one pointing at the trembling man in the worn jacket. What they couldn't see was the faded 101st Airborne tattoo hidden beneath his sleeve, or the 18 months he spent pulling wounded soldiers from burning vehicles in Kandahar. Before we go further, hit that subscribe button if you believe every veteran deserves respect. Drop a comment and tell me about a veteran you know who inspires you. Now let me tell you what happened next. Robert had driven himself to the hospital that morning when the shaking got so bad he could barely hold his coffee cup. His daughter kept telling him to see someone about it, but he always put it off. Today was different. Today he dropped a full pot of coffee and watched it shatter across his kitchen floor, his hands jerking like they had a mind of their own. The waiting room was packed with people. A mother held a crying baby. An older man coughed into his elbow. Teenagers scrolled through their phones. And there sat Robert, trying his best to keep his hands steady on his lap, but failing miserably. The nurse at the intake desk called his name. Robert stood up slowly and walked to the counter. She was young, maybe 25, with her hair pulled back tight and an annoyed look on her face. She asked him what brought him in today without looking up from her computer screen. Robert explained that his hands had been shaking for weeks, getting worse each day. He told her he could barely eat, couldn't write, couldn't do simple things anymore. His voice was quiet and steady despite everything going on inside his body. She glanced at him briefly, then back at her screen. She asked if he had been drinking. Robert said no. She asked if he took any drugs. Again, he said no. Then she sighed loudly and told him the wait time was at least 3 hours, maybe longer. She said they had real emergencies to deal with. Robert nodded and went back to his seat. His hands kept shaking. A woman sitting across from him moved her purse closer and shifted her body away. He noticed but said nothing. An hour passed. Then too, the shaking got worse. Robert tried to drink from a water bottle but spilled it down his shirt. The liquid spread across his chest in a dark stain. A few people nearby noticed and looked away quickly, like they were embarrassed for him or maybe just uncomfortable. That is when the young medical assistant walked by with his colleague. They were both in scrubs, probably in their early 20s. One of them looked at Robert and said something to the other. They both laughed, not quietly either. Loud enough that several people in the waiting room heard it. The first one said loud enough for others to hear that some people will do anything for attention. His friend added that if he really needed help, he would not be sitting there so calmly. They thought Robert could not hear them clearly, or maybe they just did not care. Robert's jaw tightened. His shaking hands clenched into fists on his lap, but he said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that some battles were not worth fighting, especially when your body was already fighting against you. Another patient, a middle-aged woman, spoke up. She asked the medical assistants if that was really appropriate. The first assistant turned to her and said they see fakers all the time. People looking for pain medication or trying to get disability paperwork signed. He said it with such confidence, like he had seen it all before. The woman looked at Robert with sympathy, but stayed quiet after that. Nobody else said anything. The waiting room fell into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the crying baby and the hum of fluorescent lights. Overhead, Robert closed his eyes and tried to breathe slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth. It was a technique he learned years ago during his military training. It helped then. It barely helped now. Another 30 minutes crawled by. A doctor finally came out and called another patient's name. Then another. Robert stayed in his seat, hands still shaking, shirt still wet, dignity wearing thinner with each passing minute. Then something happened. A man in his 60s walked into the emergency room. He wore a veteran baseball cap and walked with a slight limp, He checked in at the desk and turned to find a seat. His eyes scanned the room and landed on Robert. The man stared for a moment. Then his eyes moved down to Robert's hands. He saw the shaking. He saw the wet shirt. He saw the defeated posture of a man who had been waiting too long and treated too poorly. The older man walked directly to Robert and sat down in the empty chair beside him. He did not ask permission. He just sat down and looked at Robert's face. Carefully, he asked Robert if he had served. Robert looked up, surprised by the direct question. He nodded slowly and said yes, Army, 101st Airborne. The older man's face changed immediately. His eyes widened slightly, and he leaned back in his chair. He said he was 2nd Battalion, 502nd Infantry Regiment. He served in Iraq during the surge. Robert managed a small smile despite everything. He told the man he was with the same division, different battalion. He spent time in Afghanistan between 2009 and 2011. The older veteran asked about the shaking. Robert explained it started about 6 months after he got back stateside. At first it was just his left hand, just a little tremor when he was tired or stressed. Then it spread to his right hand, then both arms. Now it was constant, uncontrollable. Getting worse every single day. The older man listened without interrupting. When Robert finished, he asked if anyone had mentioned the possibility of it being service-related. Robert said the VA kept telling him it was probably stress or anxiety, that he should try meditation or therapy. Nobody took it seriously. The veteran stood up abruptly. He walked straight to the intake desk where the same nurse sat typing. He did not raise his voice, but spoke clearly and firmly. He told her that the man sitting over there was a combat veteran who clearly needed medical attention, and that he had been sitting in that waiting room for over 2 hours being mocked by her staff. The nurse started to respond, but the veteran cut her off. He said he did not want to hear excuses. He told her to get a doctor out here now, or he would make sure the hospital administration heard about how they treat veterans in their emergency room. Other people in the waiting room started paying attention. A few pulled out their phones. The atmosphere shifted completely. Within 5 minutes, a different nurse came out. She was older, more experienced looking. She approached Robert with an apologetic expression and asked him to follow her to an examination room immediately. As Robert stood up, his jacket sleeve rolled up slightly. The older veteran noticed it first. The faded blue and white screaming eagle tattoo of the 101st Airborne. Below it were numbers, a unit designation. And below that, a date. The veteran recognized that date. His face went pale. He knew exactly what operation happened on that date. He knew what Robert had been through. Robert walked toward the examination room with the nurse. As he passed the 2 young medical assistants who had mocked him earlier, they suddenly went quiet. One of them had seen the tattoo too. His face flushed red with shame. In the examination room, a doctor came in quickly. She was thorough and kind. She asked detailed questions about his service, about his symptoms, about what treatments he had tried. She actually listened. After a physical exam, she told Robert she suspected he might have a neurological condition related to exposure during his deployment. She mentioned burn pits, chemical exposure, traumatic brain injuries that sometimes show delayed symptoms. She said she was ordering immediate tests and would fast-track a referral to a neurologist who specialized in veteran care. Robert felt something he had not felt in months: hope. Someone finally believed him. Someone finally took him seriously. Seriously. Doctor left to arrange the tests. Robert sat alone in the exam room, his hands still shaking but his heart a little lighter. A knock came at the door. It was the older veteran from the waiting room. He apologized for interrupting, but said he needed to say something. He told Robert that he looked up that date from his tattoo. He knew it was the date of a major operation in Kandahar where several vehicles were hit by IEDs. He asked if Robert was there. Robert nodded slowly. He said he was a combat medic attached to an infantry unit that day. 3 vehicles were hit within minutes of each other. Fires everywhere. Screaming everywhere. He pulled out 4 soldiers from the burning wreckage. 2 survived. 2 did not. He breathed in smoke and chemicals and burning fuel for hours while they worked to save everyone they could. The older veteran's eyes filled with tears. He told Robert that one of those soldiers he pulled out was his nephew, his sister's oldest boy. He survived that day because someone risked everything to pull him from that fire. Robert's shaking hands came up to his face. He had never known what happened to those soldiers after he got them to safety. He never followed up. He never asked. It hurt too much to know. The older veteran grabbed Robert's shoulder firmly. He told him that his nephew was alive, married, now with 2 kids, working as a teacher in Ohio. He told Robert that his family had always wondered who the medic was that saved him that day. But records were chaotic, and they never found out. He said that seeing Robert sit in that waiting room, being treated like he was nothing, being mocked and ignored, made him sick. He told Robert that he was a hero whether anyone in this hospital recognized it or not. Robert broke down. The shaking in his hands matched the shaking in his shoulders as he cried. Years of holding everything in came pouring out in that small examination room. The veteran stayed with him. He did not leave. He just stood there with his hand on Robert's shoulder until the crying stopped. When Robert finally composed himself, the veteran pulled out his phone. He said he was calling his nephew right now. He said Robert deserved to know that the lives he saved were being lived fully, and with gratitude. The phone call happened right there. Robert heard the voice of a man he saved 15 years ago. A man who remembered that day, who remembered the medic with steady hands and a calm voice telling him he was going to be okay. A man who wanted to say thank you but never had the chance. By the time Robert left the hospital that day, everything had changed. He had appointments scheduled. He had a doctor who believed him. He had tests ordered that might finally explain what was happening to his body. And he had something else. He had a reminder that what he did mattered. The 2 young medical assistants were called into a supervisor's office before the end of their shift. The older veteran had followed through on his promise. He filed a formal complaint with detailed information about how Robert was treated. The hospital took it seriously. Robert drove home that evening as the sun set over the highway. His hands still shook on the steering wheel. That had not changed, but something inside him had shifted. He was not invisible anymore. He was not just a problem to be ignored. He was seen. He was valued. He was remembered. 3 weeks later, Robert got his diagnosis. Toxic exposure related. Neurological damage with tremors. It was treatable, manageable, and most importantly, it was real. The VA approved his claim within a month. He started therapy and medication that actually helped. But the thing that helped most was the phone call he received every Sunday. From a man in Ohio, a teacher with 2 kids who wanted his children to know the man who gave their father a second chance at life. Who wanted Robert to know that heroes do not always wear medals. Sometimes they just wear the scars of service and keep moving forward even when their own bodies betray them. Robert Chun never went back to that emergency room, but he never forgot what happened there either. The day he was mocked for shaking. The day someone finally stood up for him. The day he learned that the lives he saved remembered him even when he had forgotten to remember himself.